Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And it's episode 225, which, if this was a comic, would possibly be a double-sized extra anniversary special issue or something, but it's a podcast, so it's just a normal one. But speaking of comics, we are covering Joker, Folie, Deux, the sequel to the pre-pandemic edgelord epic Joker, and then we'll be covering Rebel Ridge, the latest movie on Netflix from Jeremy Saulnier of Green Room fame. But before any of that, Alistair, what else have you consumed in the last fortnight?
So I want to talk about a show that's, well, not really caused many waves considering how much money's been spent on it. Yeah, at least it caused some waves with the first season. And that is Rings of Power. Amazon Prime's very expensive adaptation of collective bits of Tolkien lore that it forms a sort of rough prequel to Lord of the Rings. We discussed the first season of this show on the podcast when it came out, and yeah, it wasn't particularly well received. I think, Nick, you actually had it as your worst show of the year.
It was certainly in competition, yeah.
Yeah, so I've just completed the second season, and yeah, it's not really loads better. Is the headline. So this isn't really a recommendation, but it is something I would like to discuss. The main thing, obviously, is that it has the same problems as the previous one in that not a lot happens in some quite long episodes. Each episode's between an hour and 10 to sort of like an hour and sort of 20 minutes. So yeah, they're quite long episodes. Not a lot happens, and the characters aren't particularly interesting or exciting. So yeah, those are kind of the big problems. But what I want to zoom in on is a less documented issue with the show, which is that it really doesn't know what it wants to be. Or more accurately, it's kind of split between two things it's trying to be, which is it kind of wants to be the Tolkien Game of Thrones. The problem with this is that what people liked about Game of Thrones was it was a fantasy show, but it was kind of down to earth in terms of both its politics and its characterization. It was mainly, a fight over, who gets to be the king, which is a sort of relatable medieval political conflict. And the characters were sort of relatable, scheming tricksters with varying degrees of awfulness, who were trying to, trick their way to get onto the throne, or their faction to get on the throne, which is, kind of sort of relatable and more believable, despite the fact it's a show that has, like, dragons and ice zombies in it and things like that. Whereas, like, Tolkien, less relatable politics, more interesting, unusual fantasy lore, drawing on his love of linguistics and, like, Norse mythology. It's very, very different, although it is very interesting, and he's created a very rich world with lots of, amazing, imaginative lore to it. The problem is they don't really lean enough into the kind of rich, interesting, and sort of fantastical world that Tolkien's built up through his writing. Although, if they did obviously do more lore, we don't want just a wander through Tolkien's legendarium. There needs to be good characters and good drama. But the show keeps insisting on being trying to down to earth and about realistic conflicts, to basically be an interesting show about gods and heroes and epic mythology and, jewels crafted with the light of, the kind of the creation of the universe that drive people mad and all that amazing stuff that Tolkien's imagined. But there isn't enough relatable medieval politics to make another Game of Thrones style show. Yeah, they're not fighting over who gets to be king or something that seems, more down to earth. So it's not enough of a fantasy show to be a good Tolkien show. It's not enough of a Game of Thrones style show to be the new Game of Thrones, and I feel this is the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the second season, obviously. I've read a couple of reviews of it, which implied that it got a bit better, although that was then heavily caveated. But they do seem to think it had improved and had a bit more of a sense of actual drama, which is the main thing I think was missing from season 1. But to be honest, the fact that it's 8 episodes, which, as you say, are almost the length of a movie, does discourage me from trying, because I found the first one a bit of a slog. Yeah, I'm not really in it for the hardcore Tolkiana, but a bit more actual tangible drama would have probably helped.
Yeah, and you're right, this one does have more tangible drama and things like that. There's the main plot line, which is more entertaining than what was going on in the previous season, was Sauron has disguised himself as a sort of angelic elven type figure and has manipulated Celebrimbor, it's pronounced, the elves' finest smith, into making rings of power, which he's then distributing through the world to corrupt people. Yeah, and there's also a plot line with Durin, the dwarf from the first season, his father wearing one of the rings of power and being corrupted by it. And there's a good drama there, a son watching his father slip away into madness, the manipulation of Sauron, his tricks, and things like that. And that sort of stuff is entertaining to watch. So there is actually something happening in this season. There is more of the Gandalf character aimlessly wandering around with some hobbits, which is also not super entertaining.
Yeah, there was It's instead of drama, the first season mostly had what I often describe somewhat derisively on this podcast as prequel shit, where I'm expected to be fully interested in how Mordor became Mordor, or how Gandalf potentially became Gandalf. I forget if they actually confirmed whether he is Gandalf or not. They seem to be quite heavily implying it. It just never really provided that much investment for me, someone who isn't fundamentally that invested in how stuff that's later in Lord of the Rings came to exist.
Yeah. There is more prequel shit in this, although not as much in the first one. Again, this one's mainly about the forging of the rings and things like that. Yeah, obviously the Durin plot line is very much about how did Moria get abandoned, although they haven't quite got to that point yet. But yeah, how the dwarfs delved deep into the earth and awoken the Balrog. I'm going to drop some spoilers at this point. Season 2, they awaken the Balrog. Again, we know where that's going from the film and things like that. Yeah, and obviously the rings that are in the first film are being forged. So first film, the old film. There is also, actually speaking of the film, or there is some really, really cringeworthy bit when Celebrimbor finds out that the person he's working with is Sauron and does say, "The Lord of the Rings," in a sort of horrible, they're doing the title bit. I know there is some more drama in this. There's an epic battle in the final 2 episodes. Again, it's kind of very much taken from Game of Thrones. It's kind of, there's a big medieval siege at the end, which I suppose is the point when it kind of, I guess, sort of links the Tolkien drama and what people want, kind of medieval battle, Game of Thrones style. But partly because it's orcs on one side, it doesn't give the Game of Thrones battles, even though the Lannisters are nasty and evil, you can kind of root for the Lannisters. Or, for example, the Battle of Blackwater. Yeah, you're not really on Lannister's side or the King's brother, I've forgotten his name, his side. So yeah, you're kind of emotionally invested in the characters to a degree. And yeah, it creates a sort of sense of moral ambiguity when, in real life, when 2 armies clash, there's not one that's good and one that's bad. The problem in Tolkien, because Tolkien in essence is a medieval parable of good and evil. The orcs are evil. The elves are good. It does take away, again, that sort of believable dimension in it. And also, again, they could have leaned into more magic and fantasy, which they don't because they want to make more Game of Thrones, basically. I guess I keep looping back to this. And also, I guess the point to make is people liked Game of Thrones because it had lots happening and interesting characters. So yeah, there was a lot of plot in each season of Game of Thrones. The episodes were quite long, especially in the later seasons, but they had really exciting characters that people liked and lots of interesting twists and battles and conflicts and things like that. And that's why people liked Game of Thrones, primarily not because of, it's about a relatable medieval power struggle rather than a good versus evil, angels and demons parable.
Speaking of characters people like, is Galadriel still annoying?
Yeah, she's still very much mopey warrior with a dark past type. That's discussed, I think, in the previous episode when we were talking about Starvaker. Milford Clark, is it?
Morfydd, isn't it?
Morfydd, yeah, it's Welsh. She is very good and does a lot with the material that she's given. So similar, the guy playing Durin the Younger is also, very good with some kind of fairly tropey fantasy stuff. But yeah, Galadriel could have become a more interesting main character. There's the classic thing, there's almost little character development for her. She's just, again, dark and upset because her brother was killed by Morgoth. There's the whole thing of basically in this season she feels bad because Sauron tricked her in the previous season.
That did make her look quite stupid, yes.
Yeah, and now she's angry about it. Yeah, Morfydd Clark is world class and she does a lot of, I think, good work with the script that she's given. But there is, again, little character developments and it keeps looking back to the essential issue with the show, which is the characters aren't interesting and not a lot happens. Yeah, I think she doesn't get many serious plot points in this season until, the final episode when she confronts Sauron again. And at least that feels like it has some kind of payoff and it's been something they've been building to. So yeah, in ways this is a little bit better than the previous season. I guess what I really wanted was a great show about Tolkien lore. I've sort of fallen into a bit of a YouTube rabbit hole, which to be honest is more interesting than watching Rings of Power, of there's lots of videos on YouTube explaining the kind of complex mythological plot of the Silmarillion in 20-minute videos, which probably because I'm not sure if I'm going to read a massive book that's written in poetic verse and things like that. Sorry if that makes me sound like a Philistine. Yeah, it's a fascinating and interesting and beautiful and complex world he's built, and I feel there's potential for a really exciting show. And also it wouldn't have, as you said, the prequel shit. If they said it during the first age of Middle-earth, then there would be kind of a conflict against Morgoth and there'll be fights over kind of enormous magical trees that light up the world and things like that, and giant spiders and armies of Balrogs and things like that, which would be a very different show from what they've made, but also it wouldn't be prequel shit. It would be, I don't know, yeah, even closer to like, yeah, House of the Dragon, something that's set a long time before the thing that we like and feels different and things like that. There's lots of potential, I feel, in the epic story that Tolkien's woven for great TV and great drama. You know, gods being corrupted, turning evil, again, with armies of flaming Balrogs and heroes trying to, like, steal jewels from his crown and things like that. There's good potential there for a TV show. In fact, one that might actually kind of put the cool back into high fantasy with elves and magic and, like I say, dragons and things like that. Well, there's dragons in Game of Thrones, but, maybe, Game of Thrones broke the mold. This had the potential to break the mold again, but instead of breaking the mold, it's just trying to do basically, you like Lord of the Rings? You like Game of Thrones? Here's the two mashed together, when really, bizarrely, the two are kind of opposites, even though they're both fantasy shows, and most people say, oh, fantasy shows, they must be the same, but in many ways they're the opposite of each other. So this is where I feel there's a huge missed opportunity with this material. That probably cost them millions to license.
I mean, it certainly famously cost millions to make. I mean, it's interesting to me how much the second season of this has just not made barely a dent in the culture, the discourse. Like, I could very easily not know this was happening. It's only because a couple of people I follow occasionally mention it that I know this exists. It has made absolutely no larger splash.
Yeah, that is really bizarre.
I mean, I think mostly that speaks to how shit the first season was, to be honest.
And the second season doesn't have something electric to recapture people's attention. Now, there must be examples of shows there must be many, that fumbled the first season and then got good. First season of Stargate is a little predictable. They largely go to a series of planets that all look like rural Canada, because that's where they have the budget for.
There's a lot of seasons which, get good in later seasons. I mean, it gets good in season 2 or it gets good in season 5 is famously a bit of a cliche,
Buffy.
Yeah, Buffy didn't get really good till season 2. Legends of Tomorrow didn't get really good till season 3. A lot of sitcoms don't really find their voice till season 2. It's not a new thing. And although I gather this may have slightly improved in season 2, it doesn't sound like it's, fully turned around and become essential viewing.
No, it has not. Considering the amount it cost to make, yeah. They seem to advertise this a lot less, which probably is one of the reasons why it's not cut through to the degree, or at least people aren't talking about it. But the fact that it's largely dull and uninteresting is probably why no one's liking it. Though I can't believe that someone was given the Silmarillion and they decided to make it dull. I mean, Tolkien Middle-earth set show based on the wider Tolkien lore. I thought, is this going to be some awful fan wank-off, kind of like bizarre scenes about the pantheon of the Vala and things like that kind of don't make any sense to anyone and are sort of too ethereal and abstract to be entertaining. But no, they actually just decided to make it dull, which I would not have predicted.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who isn't massively into high fantasy as a genre, outside of a few key exceptions like Game of Thrones, to be honest, watching this just kind of plays into all my negative associations about high fantasy, really. It's like, oh, great. Long, wanky speeches by elves.
Yeah. I guess I really can't emphasize enough how interesting and creative the Tolkien Legendarium is. So there's definitely better potential in there to make an interesting show, but it's not this show. So yeah, anyway, Lord of the Rings Season 2, or Rings of Power Season 2 to give its actual name. Don't watch it, to be honest, unless you love Tolkien. If you do love Tolkien, or if you liked the Lord of the Rings films or the book and are interested, just go on YouTube and type in Silmarillion Explained. You'll be pretty entertained for about 20 minutes, and then probably a bit confused by all the different sounding names of elves, or similar sounding names of elves. But yeah, to be honest, save yourself the trouble of watching, at this point, 16-hour and 15-minute long shows. Just enjoy some excitable nerds explaining the Legendarium. That's fun to watch. So, I've been watching a show that's not very good. Nick, what have you been up to?
I thankfully have actually been watching something I've actually enjoyed, so this will hopefully be a bit more upbeat, yet vaguely synchronising with the DC thing we're about to discuss later. I've been watching another DC Comics adaptation. This is Superman and Lois Season 3. Admittedly, it's not the most up-to-date DC thing I could be watching. I believe Season 4 starts on American TV around now. I think, within a few days of this coming up. So, yep, I'm a bit out of date, but in my defence, firstly, they take ages to put it on the BBC iPlayer, and then secondly, I took ages to watch it. So yeah, this is the third season of Superman and Lois, the show about a middle-aged-ish, sort of, I think he's meant to be late 30s, if not 40s, Superman, who has moved out of Metropolis back to his parents' farm with Lois Lane to raise their twin teenage sons. And, of course, because he's Superman and because they've got to make a TV show somehow, superhero antics continue to ensue. I've been watching this for obviously 3 seasons now. I've seen 3 seasons, and it's ending with Season 4, because I believe they didn't want any brand confusion with the upcoming James Gunn Superman movie, which is kind of a shame, as I really like this show. It's not exactly, I guess, sophisticated, high-level premium telly. It is in some ways quite soapy. The most interesting thing about this show, or the strangest thing about this show, is that they seem a lot more interested in the soap opera antics of the residents of Smallville than they do with a lot of the superhero stuff. There are a lot of episodes where the superhero stuff full-on feels like an afterthought, or sometimes barely even gets included. You find yourself weirdly invested in the parenting drama of Superman and Lois, and Superman's ex-girlfriend Lana Lang and her husband and their kids, and John Henry Irons, aka Steel. Yeah, in the comics he was one of the replacement Supermen who emerged when Superman died, and here he's been introduced for another, much more convoluted method. But nonetheless, he is here primarily to tie in with the core theme of parenting, because he too has a teenage daughter, basically. That is why he is in this. This is basically a show about parenting. My partner, who's watching this with me and may actually like it even more than I do, points out that this seems to be a show aimed at people who watched Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman, as like kids or teenagers, and are now like millennial parents and want to watch Superman going through what they are going through and want to feel like he's grown up with them. And I think that is kind of the appeal, to be honest. And it does a pretty good job of that. It's very melodramatic, it's very soapy, it's very much every week Superman learns a new important lesson about parenting or how to be a good husband. And you know, because he's Superman, he does sometimes fall short, but often it's just because he's trying so hard to be a good dude that he gets it a bit wrong, or he's trying so hard to do one thing right, he gets another thing wrong. It's very wholesome, it's very nice, it's, yeah, I cannot pretend this is advanced, high-level, morally sophisticated premium telly, but I enjoy it quite a lot.
Well, there's something to be said for aiming at the mundane and achieving that, rather than whatever Rings of Power spiraled off into becoming. Anyway, we've discussed that show enough. This sounds, really nice. It sounds like a nice, antidote, or at least alternative or palate cleanser to a lot of the premium drama we have right now, in that it seems, like quite soapy, quite domestic, focused on the everyday life. This seems actually like a pretty good approach to Superman, focusing on his like kind of wholesome, grown-up dadness. Does sound like, like a good approach, especially after the dark Man of Steel, which wasn't so much fun.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people have pontificated at great, some might say tedious length, about, how can you make Superman interesting? He's so perfect, he's so powerful, blah, blah, blah. And I think trying to make Superman cool in an edgy way is certainly difficult. Again, as you said, see Man of Steel. But at the end of the day, the other thing you can do is basically lean into the fact that Superman is basically your dad. And, therefore we make a whole super dad show about Superman dadding.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've hit on the essential truth, which is people like dads, and also like a lot of people are dads, so that is actually something that people connect to and relate to. Again, doesn't need to be edgy or dark. It can be something that people like and relate to. Yeah, I think you're probably spot on with the New Adventures of Superman connection. I did watch that show as a kid and a teen. I'm not a parent now, but I can understand exactly how I would like to see Superman go through the trials of parenthood.
And as I say, you could also watch other characters go through parenthood. It's very much a show about parenting. I mean, it's a show made by the CW, so obviously everyone is weirdly good looking, especially the characters who are meant to be like the young teens. Well, not young teens, the teens who are old enough to date. But the teens don't dominate the show. It is impressive for a network that is famous for aiming all their shows at the young teen demographic, but they have allowed this to be entirely a show about middle-aged dadding. The teens are there, but the teens are mostly there to cause trouble for the parents, basically. Almost all the actual impetus of the show falls on the parent characters. Yeah, as I say, it's an interesting way to go with your superhero show, especially considering this spun off from the Flowerverse, which actually was often quite concerned with a certain level of look at our sexy cool superheroes, and also had a certain amount of, I don't know, hyperactive, kaleidoscopic shit going on. It's just a lot of stuff being thrown at you. The Flowerverse shows, as much as I did enjoy them for a while, were not quiet or calm or contemplative, and did often just hurl random colours, shapes, and CGI things at the screen. But Superman and Lois it's quite slow, it's quite thoughtful, it's got lots of wide shots of farms.
That sounds good. What have they done in terms of villains? So is Steel, you mentioned, is he a villain, or is he just another good guy? Or, because obviously there must be some kind of super villains, I guess, for the superhero plot lines. But I wonder, like, how they make that work with the kind of everyday tone of the show.
Well, I mean, the good thing about Superman is he's so comically fast that they can just have him disappear from one scene and appear seconds later in another scene that takes place, like, across the other side of the country, because why not? So, Superman does still appear in Metropolis every so often to, fight a villain. Yeah, for villains, Steel does have a bit of a sort of antagonistic relationship with Superman at the beginning, but that's mostly a superhero misunderstanding they're going to fight for a bit way. They eventually become friends. The actual villains are... There's a couple of, like, evil Kryptonians, or at least, Kryptonians who have different ideas about how they should handle the people of Earth. There's Bizarro shows up, he's always a laugh, and I think they're bringing back Lex Luthor for the final season, which is good, as, they've got to do him eventually.
Yeah, he's, I guess the iconic Superman villain, yeah. But yeah, I suppose it does make sense. So yeah, you can have him dash off to the other side of the world to get involved in a villain plotline, which can also link in, I suppose, to the general parenting plotline of Superman needs to be home for tea, but he's not been held up because the wheel fell off his car. He's been held up because he has to fight, Megamind on top of a skyscraper in Tokyo.
Well, yeah, and there's a bit of that. There's a plotline involving one of his sons developing his superpowers, which they get a decent amount of mileage out of. You know, the kid being stupid, being scolded. How much should Superman really scold him? Is Superman being too harsh? It's all good dadding material. In the third season, and I guess mild spoilers for the third season of Superman and Lois, I'm not going to spoil what happened, the entire storyline, but I'm going to spoil the basic premise of it. Lois gets breast cancer, which is very, very sad and very... It is very overwrought, but you know, after 2 seasons of watching them do good, wholesome parenting, it is very, very sad.
I mean, that does sound, quite soapy. Not in a negative way, it just does sound soapy. It's the sort of thing that happens in a soap opera. And also, that kind of works with Superman. Like, the Man of Steel who can, save a jet engine from stacking itself into a mountain or, defeat a supervillain, but the one thing he can't do is save the people closest to him from relatively everyday things like cancer. I can see how you can get good writing out of that.
Oh yeah, that theme is revisited heavily in that season, yes. It's very good, it's at times very sad. I mean, her name's in the title, there's a reasonable chance she's probably not going to die, but then again, it's the end of the show next year, so who knows?
Yeah, cool.
And Lois gets a lot of good play in this as well. They do actually try and live up to the idea that the show is called Superman and Lois does actually get to do some good investigative journalism and play an equal role in the parenting storylines and stuff.
Yeah, she's supposed to be a top-flight reporter, which is one of the things, actually, that the Snyderverse did get right. I thought part of it, casting Amy Adams, is that they did actually make Lois seem like an impressive and accomplished journalist. So, yeah, which she's supposed to be. But I guess that's because everyone in that show is like a titanic, legendary figure. Whereas, but again, I can imagine her becoming a journalist for small-town paper, investigating local corruption. Again, could be a sort of good drama.
Yeah, no, it works. And the actors, Tyler Hoechlin and Elizabeth Tulloch, who play Superman and Lois, are very, very good. I think they've done 4 seasons and about 50 episodes by the time they finish. And although I do feel like it's a shame, it's a decent run, especially nowadays. Getting 50 episodes is something a lot of shows do not manage. So fair enough, they had a good shake of it.
Are these 12-episode runs then? They're not 20 episodes like, X-Files or Lost was?
No, the other Flowerverse shows were, but these are a bit shorter. I think the first couple were 15, and then the third one's 13, and the last one is going to be a mere 10. But it'll be about 50-ish by the time they finished.
That is a lot more than a lot of shows get this day and age. He says, bones creaking.
Well, yeah, just getting to season 4 is, sadly, somewhat of an achievement. So yeah, I would have obviously watched another season, but they are getting towards, they had a good run territory. I'm willing to let them go at this point. So yeah, for whatever it's worth, if you're in the UK, this is all up on the BBC iPlayer. If anything I've said sounds appealing, it does do it very well. I enjoyed this quite a lot. It's good, as they said, it's good comfort viewing. It's a nice time. It's good sort of competency porn. The sort of show is about nice people doing nice things nicely. It's very pleasant to watch.
Yeah, so King of the Hill vibe is probably my favourite show in that subgenre.
Yeah, so yeah, there you go. A good DC adaptation. It was good to talk about a good DC adaptation, wasn't it?
Yeah, and some good TV. So yeah. Watch that. Don't watch Rings of Power. Yeah, and then,
and also, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what we're going to discuss next and what we're going to think of it.
Right.
Cool. Let's see if that makes the final cut. Next up, this episode, we will be discussing Joker, Folie à Deux, a sequel to 2019's Joker. Arthur Fleck is on trial for the murders he committed during the first film, including the one he did on TV in the guise of Joker. And the trial is trying to determine if he is sane and thus responsible for his own actions. Meanwhile, while incarcerated in Arkham Asylum, he meets fellow psychiatric inmate Lee, and the two fall in love and escape the drudgery of their life through musical fantasies. Yes, this is a musical, something that my partner wasn't even aware of until this morning where I said it's a musical.
I had the same conversation with mine, actually. Yeah, she seemed baffled by this.
Despite the fact, unlike, say, that Wonka film when they hid the fact it was a musical by not putting the songs in the trailer, this one has the songs in the trailer. What the world will make of this, well, I guess we'll get on to that. However, we have seen this film in the cinema very recently. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, this did not end well for me. It starts off kind of alright, especially considering some of the bad reviews I've heard. I was pleasantly surprised by the first about 25 minutes, half an hour, I think, where it's just sort of Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn playing off each other in prison. It was sort of okay for a bit. They had a certain weird chemistry. Yeah, Phoenix is still very compelling as this character, just as a thing to watch. But yeah, eventually it just becomes clear to you that there's just no plot. This lengthy trial sequence starts and does not end until the film is basically over. We'll probably spoil the ending later, but I'm going to avoid doing it for now. Suffice to say, the ending, the bit that happens after the trial, only lasts about 10 minutes and does not save it. Yeah, I was sort of with it for a bit, but eventually the trial sequence starts and it just trudges slowly off a cliff, to be honest. It's just... We said of the first one when we reviewed it, I actually went back and listened to our review, but it's watchable enough. It has a certain style and dynamism and momentum that propels you through it, but it probably just disintegrates a bit if you think about it too hard afterwards. This one still has some nicely shot moments and good performances, but the momentum is just gone. It's just not there. It's just a slog after a while. Once you realise he's really not going to do anything. There are 3 types of scene in this film. He's in prison, he's on trial, he's in a fantasy sequence. And that's it. It's just flipping between those 3 things forever as your mind slowly checks out. I did not enjoy this.
No, it's not very good, to put it mildly. It's pretty dull, uninteresting, and it's largely taken up by a courtroom drama that is not very interesting. The big problem with the courtroom sequence, which I say is probably the meat and potatoes of the film, is that I didn't care about the court case, and the film didn't seem to care about it either. So the case is all about determining whether he's responsible for his actions in the first film, and whether he'll get the death penalty, which I guess has the potential for drama. However, there are a few issues with this. First of all, we know that he did the murders in the first film, and we kind of know all the reason behind it, so we don't need that to be excavated again in this film, in a sort of shorter and more condensed version. We know that Joker, whatever Joker is, a part of his personality or a sort of cipher for the destruction of nature and humanity or something like that, is responsible for the murders. We know that Arthur is an abused and afflicted person. We know all this, we saw the previous film. The outcome has very little bearing on the plot anyway, because it doesn't matter whether he's, from a character perspective, it doesn't matter how responsible he is for his actions. He's still Arthur Joker. It doesn't really change it. Doesn't seem to have much impact in his life generally, in that he's going to spend the rest of his life in one kind of institution or another, clearly, so there's not many dramatic states there. I don't think anyone particularly feels hugely invested in saving Joker from the electric chair or gas chamber or whatever they're using. That's also an issue. The trial focuses very much on what specific mental health problem he has, which is something we can come to, but also not much potential for drama there. Overall, the film is probably aware that this is a story about damaged, mad people falling in love, and also a film about how the mentally unwell are treated, and this extended courtroom sequence isn't really connected to that, so it kind of doesn't really matter. So thus meaning most of the film is given over to something that is tedious and pointless.
Based on the final moments of the courtroom sequence, we're just edging slowly towards spoiling the ending here.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur's final moment in court when he's delivering his final statement. I think what we're meant to take from it is the clear idea that, Arthur isn't possessed by some higher power or acting out some important rebellion. He's just a very sad, very broken man who just snapped and killed some people because he's sad and angry. And based on the way it's delivered, the way it's portrayed as this sort of final emotional breakdown, I feel like I'm meant to take that that's one of the key messages of the film. Arthur finally realising and admitting in public that he's just a sad, broken guy who killed some people. He's not, a godlike rebel. I have seen many interpretations of this film saying that, is this entire film basically the writer scolding the people who he feels took the wrong message from his previous film and idolised the Joker as some sort of folk hero? I mean, if this entire film is just basically the director lecturing people to stop being such fucking edgelords, then I guess I don't entirely disagree with him. But it's still not very interesting.
Yeah. I've seen the Joker claim to be everything from, again, the chaotic and destructive, element that's in all of humanity, which, to be fair, the Heath Ledger Joker kind of summed that up the best. That's been done also to people, and this is so overwrought that it's been widely mocked, people claiming, that the Joker is the embodiment of the Nietzschean Übermensch who's thrown off the slave morality of Western society and, creates his own morality through the will to power or some bullshit like that. So, those are some words that happens and that people repeat, but I can see what he's trying to say is like, no, this is not supposed to be a film about throwing off the slave morality, or some film that like white men are the the real victims of society. Again, people actually claim the previous film was like it was the white man's Malcolm X, as in the Spike Lee film, and things like that. And obviously, I feel that it's noble if he wants to set the record straight that like, no, I didn't mean that, I meant be nice to the mentally unwell. And it is also noble to make a film saying like we treat the mentally unwell really poorly, and there's even bits on the radio in the background when people say like, this is due to the breakdown in social services and things like that. That said, this film also reproduces the most damning and wrong-headed stereotype about the mentally unwell, which is that they're violent, and that mentally unwell people are much more likely to hurt themselves than anyone else. And very few mentally unwell people commit murders or acts of violence, and you're more likely to be killed by your husband or wife, especially husband or partner or parent or child, than you are by some poor person who's just been ground down by society. So I guess points for trying to correct the absolute worst people on the internet, but at the same time, please don't perpetuate stereotypes about the mentally unwell and then pretend that you deserve some kind of pat on the back, like a Best Picture nomination.
Yes, so the film is boring, and his attempts to go against stereotypes don't even work that well. It's all just not great. The courtroom drama, as you say, just lacks a sustainable... I don't know, there's just no actual drama to it. There's no back and forth. I don't feel, the case sliding this way or that. No one ever makes a point where I go, oh shit, has he unlocked the whole thing? It just sort of happens. It's just sort of people yelling at each other. It's just talking. It's just a sustained, I don't know, I guess, character study for a character who isn't really that interesting. The Lady Gaga character, Harley Quinn, who I guess we should talk about, as she is probably the main new addition to this, in lieu of any actual plot. Yeah, she is a sort of compelling-ish new presence. She does make, as I say, the first half hour of this film kind of interesting. But after that first half hour, she doesn't actually do a huge amount. And yeah, I don't really know what she really adds. If anything, it almost feels like another slight troll of, oh, are we going to introduce this character to be a cool new sort of unpredictable, randomising presence in the story? And then it becomes clear that no, she's not going to do a huge amount, to be honest.
I don't know what this take on the Harley Quinn character is bringing that, I don't know, recent takes, such as the Margot Robbie one or the animated one, which I have not seen, but people seem to like. Yeah, I don't know what this is adding.
I mean, the Harley Quinn take, I don't know, is it just another example of, I don't know, an attempt to own fans who thought the Joker was something and then immediately stop caring when he turns out to be something far more mundane? I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, and obviously they've cast someone who's primarily known as being a singer, although she has done some good acting in things such as A Star Is Born and House of Gucci. Although House of Gucci is not really a very good film.
She's decent in this. I wasn't planning on trying to own her acting. She's good enough. She does have presence in the scene she's in.
Yeah, and I was going to say I felt that Gaga and Phoenix both do really great work, again, with what they're given. Obviously, Phoenix is a great actor, and he does successfully portray pain and anguish very, very well, and the sort of manic side. And Lady Gaga can really sing, especially in the film's bigger numbers. Like, there's a gospel number, and she's got a great voice. There's quite a few sort of swing and big band sort of numbers. Film riffs heavily on sort of MGM musicals and things like that. They've lent into the musical side as much as they want to. I do wonder how much the DC edgelords who like the previous film enjoyed the musical aspect of this one.
I really don't think the film is for them. If anything, the film is trying to actively annoy them.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Or it's trying to lean into the fact that the last one got a Best Picture nomination. They're trying to create something that's genuinely arty with this experimentation and music. However, it doesn't... Like many things in this film, it doesn't work great. The reason for this is several reasons. First of all, this film seems to lack a defining aesthetic. It's also raised that kind of confused about exactly when it's set. The first film, for its flaws, did at least have an interesting kind of 70s New York feel. It felt a bit Taxi Driver, that sort of thing going on, and that was at least consistent. This one, it has a lot of songs from the sort of 40s to 60s era, Carpenters, Sinatra, that sort of thing. Yeah, but also it seems to be set possibly during the 70s or 80s based on the kind of technology and the general aesthetic, plus also kind of the 40s, in the sense it's kind of got this sort of 40s prison gangster thing going on, which runs through a lot of Batman, and I can see how that kind of works, and wider DC stuff, and I can kind of see how that works, but here the issue is that it's all kind of colliding together with the music, which is the thing setting the tone. Also, the general aesthetic of it, picked up from the previous film, so the tone's kind of off. Also, I'm not impressed by the relatively obvious beat of basically scenes of violence conducted according to quite saccharine songs from the 40s or 60s, like Carpenters or something like that. It's kind of one note. There's a fantasy sequence in which the Joker and Harley Quinn are up to some violence, and also, with some songs that are considered like, the sort of stuff your nan likes. That beat is tortured to death.
That sort of beat's been slowly rinsed to death over the course of the last 10, 15 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, probably more like 25 to 30 years. The absolute best version of it is Reservoir Dogs, the stuck in the middle of you torture scene. Imagine someone who saw that and thought, that's really cool. Let's do that, but for like a whole film. No.
The musical stuff, I don't know. Again, when it first happens in the first half hour, it sort of seems like an interesting new idea, a change of pace, something a bit different for this sequel. And then as it just happens again and again and again in ways that seem increasingly arbitrary or increasingly just, oh, I see they've found a way to fill another 3 to 4 minutes. The film was already too long anyway. So, yeah. It's not even that interesting. It's just belting out some standards in a slightly jukeboxy way. It eventually just becomes a sort of Arthouse Glee, which is not a huge amount of fun.
No, exactly. I mean, contrast it to what you're saying about Superman and Lois. You know, that seems like at least they found like something that's like a tone that's like enjoyable and watchable and pleasant, whereas this seems to be so all over the place and trying to be so many different things that it doesn't really work. And also at the core, though, it's kind of like dull. And things like that. It kind of, on some level, feels like a first-year undergraduate essay that's been thrown together the nights before. There may be, like, some decent ideas in there that have been picked up from somewhere, but, like, really, the whole thing is just poorly planned and poorly executed.
Yeah, I don't know. There's probably a better version of this somewhere. Maybe you could do it fully from the perspective of Harley Quinn. Maybe you could, God forbid, have them actually break out of prison and have something actually happen. But this version they've made does not do a huge amount for me. It really feels like this is the product of the first one doing well, the studio wanting a sequel, and the cast and crew say, yeah, sure, give us enough money and we'll do it. Do we have an idea? Not so much, really, but, you know, give us enough money and we'll do it.
Yep. That is very much the vibe we're getting from this, yeah. And the consummate professionals are doing their damnedest to make this not be a disaster, but doesn't really save it from, again, like the poor planning and the way things are overall executed. I mean, I could go on. I have other criticisms. Quick things like this film is not violent enough. Like, this is very much like a...
At last, Edgelord Alistair comes out.
Well, I would say that, like, for a start, like, this film is kind of, yeah, again, like an edgy 14-year-old's idea of violence, things like that. First of all, the only real violence in the film is physical violence. What's scary about things like prison system and the mental health system, that the way that, you know, the more aggressive side that overlaps with the prison system and the way we treat mental health people is not actual violence, although actual violence is scary and terrible, but it's the infantilization of the system, it's the threat of violence, it's the verbal and emotional abuse and things like that. This film could have been much darker and more disturbing. I understand that maybe it wanted to be a film more about how we treat the mentally ill than a film that's a meditation on the nature of violence or things like that, but yeah, it's not particularly exciting in that way, or in any way, but there's definitely an missed opportunity there. I don't know, to do something that's like, this film isn't even as shocking as Natural Born Killers, a film that I think is a bit really overrated, to be honest. Like Bonnie and Clyde, that's a great film. Go watch that.
It is still a Batman-adjacent film. I'm not sure we were really expecting genuinely shocking levels of hardcore violence, were we?
No, I guess not. But even like something that's like genuinely quite scary. Being in prison's a scary place. In this one, it's not. There's even a bit when like he insults the guards on TV and then the guards rough him up a bit. But like, it's a bit mild, really. Just gets like kind of pushed around a bit. You know, it's not pleasant to watch, but like, you know, compare it to, say, the police going totally to town in that guy in Red Riding. That's disturbing. You know, what it's like to be locked in a small room and sprayed with a fire hose. You know, that sort of stuff is really upsetting. But this film, I guess for the reasons we discussed, it doesn't want to do that. But like, I don't know, so many missed opportunities to make something that could have at least been like interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like it was on a level with the first one in terms of violence and stuff. There was, you know, a certain amount of disturbing stuff being implied.
Yeah, well, in this film, he doesn't even kill anyone, I guess. Because they're trying to show that he's actually just a poor soul, not, you know, an agent of chaos or whatever, like the Joker's supposed to be. I mean, the bit when he kills the people in the subway in the first film is one of the better bits, and it's generally quite shocking. But there's nothing like that in this film.
Well, no, because nothing really happens in this film.
I'm determined to say something nice about this film as we got this far, and the only thing I can think of is this film is better off for not having Batman in it. As the first one did.
Yeah, there is a bit less obnoxious mythology shit. There is less attempts to shoehorn franchise stuff in. There's a cameo from Harley to Harvey Dent. Well, a sustained guest appearance by Harvey Dent, and that's kind of about it.
Yeah.
And yes, it does get the balance of taking place in the Batman universe, but not obnoxiously shoving itself closer to Batman about that.
Yeah. So that's my nice thing to say.
Well, it looks all right enough. It's well made, and as we say, the actors, especially Gargo and Phoenix, do a decent job. It's the sort of really basic fundamental execution stuff is still there, but it is unfortunately let down quite badly by, you know, the script.
Yeah, Brendan Gleeson, he does quite a good job with doing a kind of a bully character, which he can act that part quite well. The guard who's a bit of a bully, there's some good bits in that. Like, there's a bit when he gives the Joker, or Arthur Fleck, a cigarette and then hits him on the head a second later. That's a sort of bizarre, like, bully mentality. Steve Coogan plays a sort of seedier version of Tony Wilson, I guess. Something like that. Not really sure what he's going for there, but he's also in this for one scene.
He is also in it, although I did not particularly like that scene.
No, it's not really a great scene, is it? Yeah, and again, why Steve Coogan? I don't know. I guess he's got the character of a sort of 70s TV host. He can do that well, and he has done that. It's not a million miles away from Partridge. Do we want to discuss the ending?
Yeah, sure. Spoilers. Joker, Folie, Deux, spoilers. Spoilers. Get your spoilers here. Here they come. Off you go.
Right. Well, yeah, so obviously this film has an ending, believe it or not. And
It doesn't feel like it's going to, but it does eventually.
yeah, and then it comes out of nowhere, also issue, in that, like, yeah, whilst on her way to somewhere else in the prison, a character who has basically been in the background sort of staring moodily at Arthur Fleck the whole time, comes up and stabs him to death. I don't know from this we're supposed to interpret that this guy was the real Joker or has become the real Joker in that we know almost nothing about him. I know some people are annoyed, not to get into the criminology of DC fandom, but some people are annoyed that they gave the Joker like a name and a backstory when he's supposed to be against, and it seems to have just manifested in the world to wreak chaos and destruction. So maybe that's the idea that this guy is the Joker who fights Batman, the person with no identity other than being an agent of chaos. But yeah, he stabs Arthur Fleck and then he dies, and that's the end. And it's also a bit of a kind of, what? That's what we're going with the ending? All right.
Yeah, as you say, I think they're trying to get back to that a little bit. I don't know if it's trying to appease the fanboys. Part of me honestly wonders if it's just them wanting to kill him off so they can't be made to do another one. Yeah, I don't know. It's a very strange, out of nowhere ending. Part of me did appreciate the something at least happening aspect of it. I guess it's an ending to the themes of the film in so much as it's a final kick in the teeth for Arthur Fleck, a final reminder that he really is just some loser who has no place among the true psychopaths of the world.
Yeah, or someone who's totally superfluous to society in that he dies and no one cared. He died in a totally pointless way and no one cared, thus ends the sad life of Arthur Fleck. It's a modern version of Jude the Obscure, even if it's shit. Which is obviously the main problem. But I think the main issue with the ending is it's not really connected to anything else in the film, in that the two main threads, the court case and the relationship with Harley Quinn, neither of those are connected to the ending, so the ending kind of feel like comes out of nowhere, other than they've established at one point there's a guy who sits at the back glaring angrily at Arthur Fleck. Yeah, it's not really connected to what came before.
Yeah, I mean, I was honestly half expecting, I guess we're doing full spoilers, yeah. Towards the end of the film, he breaks out of the courtroom briefly, thanks to someone setting off a car bomb outside it, and briefly reunites with Harley Quinn outside, on top of the steps from the first movie, actually. And then she says, "No, I'm afraid you're not as cool as I thought you were, so you can fuck off." I'm paraphrasing. And then he goes back to prison and gets stabbed. And that's the end of the film. And part of me was a bit sort of, I really thought Harley Quinn was going to stab him, to be honest. I really thought that was going to be the end. And that would honestly have always felt like a more satisfying resolution to the film. She stabs him, he dies on the iconic steps, film ends. But on the other hand, maybe that would have been too much giving the people what they want. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it would have at least addressed the issue that the main thrust of the film is about his relationship with Harley Quinn, and the ending is in no way connected to that. Yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't work, does it? Yeah. I mean, I respect them for having the finality to wrap it up and say, right, we're doing no more of this. You're not going to get Joker, Menage a Trois, no, Joker, Quattro Formaggio. I know that's Italian, not French, but there we go.
I think that's enough for that as well.
Yeah. At least it's a finale ending, and this sorry chapter in the history of cinema is conclusively wrapped up.
Yeah, never mind. It's over. The first one was kind of polarising. This one, at least we could all get together and agree, it seems, for the most part, but it's not very good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got Folie in the title, we should probably have guessed.
Yeah, maybe that's the one thing that Joker will finally bequeath to humanity, in that finally something we can all agree on. This is not what we wanted. Finally, this episode, we will be discussing Rebel Ridge, the new film from Jeremy Saulnier. Terry is on the way to post bail for his brother, who is about to be transferred to a maximum security prison, when he's stopped by the police and his cash is seized by some greedy and racist cops in a small town he's passing through. Terry then attempts to negotiate the return of his money, but with no success. When the police refuse to return his cash, it is revealed that Terry is a Marine Corps martial arts expert, and that he knows how to handle himself in a fight. This then leads to a tit-for-tat campaign of escalating violence between Terry and the authoritarian police chief of the small town. We saw this film recently on Netflix. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, happily, after that massive wedge of complaining, this is really good. This is an excellent movie. This is a possible contender for the occasionally mentioned Titus Fuck Award. It really just gets straight to it, and it never gives you more than you need to follow it, but it also never leaves you lost. It's a very impressive, straightforward, quite long, but also still quite lean action movie. It's kind of another entry in the, the you messed with the wrong dude school of action films that seems to have really taken off since John Wick. Some local assholes decide to pick on a guy only to discover he's a terrifying badass. But it's a slightly more grounded, measured approach to this. It doesn't, full on break out into ridiculous martial arts, torture, and, I don't know, assault weaponry. He's just a little bit more of a badass than they were really prepared for, and it's relatable in a very sort of enjoyable but also faintly horrifying way. It uses these ideas of like civil forfeiture and deliberately frustrating bureaucracy to make it clear why these guys are such pricks, encouraged of course by the racism. So yeah, this is a good film. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's good action tense film. Jeremy Saulnier does really good action films that are kind of like low key, not like again like trucks flying off the roof of buildings, kind of everything exploding, more sort of like action that's kind of tense in close quarters. We discussed in this podcast Green Room, which is a absolutely great film. It's a really good action movie, probably one of the best films I've seen about the punk scene also ever. And also I highly recommend everyone going and looking at Blue Ruin on Netflix, which is up there, which is one of his early films. It's again a kind of good low-key action drama like this. Low-key in the sense of it's the stakes are just some guy versus some other guys. There's always tension, there's always kind of it's driving towards the next thing, a kind of like major scene, major action bit. Yeah, like you say, it's tight as fuck. As a thing. And this one has like a political edge to it in that it's exploring corruption and racism in small town America. So it's got something more, I think, than the average you messed with the wrong dude film. I've also heard it described as the friendly neighborhood sociopath films.
Yeah.
We're talking about, Taken, The Equalizer, John Wick, Nobody, Lou. These films really come in all stripes. And it does stick to the tropes of those films. It's always the classic bit when they're given the opportunity to do the right thing, they turn it down and thus have revenge wreaked upon them. But this one, I think, has, with the political edge, it's got a little bit more to it, which is what makes it more interesting.
Well, there's a real sense of, I don't know, moral outrage for actual reasons that are slightly more sophisticated than just, I don't know, you killed my dog, you parked on my lawn. you pricks.
You talked in the cinema
Yeah.
during a screening of Joker, Folie and Deux.
I know, that was quite annoying, but it's honestly hard to blame them considering how boring the film was. Anyway, must stop reviewing Joker. Yeah, it does give it a bit more of a feeling of, sometimes if you think about it, some of these films are a bit arbitrary. I mean, you usually have the people who are being murdered be part of something, evil enough that they probably deserve to die, you can more or less assume. Like they're gangsters or Nazis or occupying soldiers or something. But this one, really makes sure you have reasons to hate these people.
Yeah.
Also, to be fair, it does, mild spoilers for the ending, it does moderate itself down a bit. He doesn't, just massacre a load of dudes.
Yeah, partly because his skill set is specifically martial arts. So he's good, for example, at like someone comes up with a gun, he grabs them, twists their arm, takes the gun out, removes the bullets, like he's fighting people, but also he's not also just like kind of just throwing bodies everywhere. Well, in terms of dead bodies everywhere. Probably didn't need to explain that. But which is also an interesting take. There's a sort of close quarter martial arts to this. Again, we're not in a sort of Crouching Tiger, Jackie Chan style, like really showing martial arts, but it is kind of got some very slick, like close quarter, like, just a guy like, uses a car door to disarm someone who's coming at him with like, a weapon. Saulnier is good at that up close, low key action or like low concept action.
Well, it's like similar to Green Room, I guess. It has a very strong sense of like choreography and space, even though one of the fun things about Green Room is that it was set in a very, very small, confined space. So the sense of like location and where everything is was even more important. But even in this film, which is set more sort of across this larger town, the individual fight scenes have a very good sense of space, and it's very clear what's going on at any given time and where he is and which dude he's currently taking down. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's well thought out. It's well choreographed. It's well structured. Yeah, it's got real attention to it. I kind of like the kind of, as you mentioned, the kind of plot of the bureaucracy of the system and the forfeit of seizure and all the things like that. It's kind of really shows how the systems and like the laws and the police can just turn against the average person, especially if they're corrupt and greedy, and can be used to sort of to frustrate this poor guy who's just trying to help his brother out.
Well, there's a good cascading plot of things just getting worse. It does a good job of just building and building and building to this sort of boiling point. Again, it is from the school of a guy gets picked on until he snaps, but it's not unrealistic. It's not implausible. Things happen in a very natural way, which both seems like it could happen and seems like if it happened to you and you just happened to be a man with the right specific set of skills, as I believe they say, you might conceivably fucking snap.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's very efficient with his characterization. He's trying to help his brother. That's it, yeah. That's all you need to know. He's trying to get his brother out of jail. There's maybe slightly more to it than that, but that's basically it. Yeah, and which is, perfect motivation. You know, who wouldn't go to extreme lengths to help out a family member who was, in a really bad situation? Quick, precise characterization. Perfect.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing you could just drop us straight into and we'll immediately understand. It works very well. You could just sort of go straight into this opening scene. You don't even need to show him, like, I don't know, setting out to get his brother out or introduce the concept of his brother or anything. You could just have him, as they do in the opening scene. He's on his bike. The cops decide to arbitrarily stop him, probably mostly because he's black, and then just happen to find this bail money. He says, I need it to get my brother out, and then you immediately understand his motivation. And that's it. Again, it's lean, it's tight, it works.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. The trailer for this film's worth watching because, the trailer packs all that in 20 seconds or something like that. Goes to show, how tight the concept is. There is a bit more to that. I like how it expands into the politics side of it as well. Actually, I think on several levels there's several political things going on. The first and most obvious one is, this is a film about racism in small town America. The universally white, blue-collar police force has taken against this black man who's just shown up in their community. They feel that they have a right to surveil, police, bully him because he's not from their community and he's clearly different. It's not made explicit as well. There's no point where the police chief, who's the main villain, goes on some foul-mouthed rant dropping the N-word and things like that. It conveys racism without people needing to be like cartoon character racists. Although, they do a good job of making the police feel, unpleasant and just the sort of annoying bully types, they're characterized quite efficiently. There's also another element, though, of the interesting thing of how the money that's seized is used to, fund the weapons that the police use, these heavy-duty military stuff, the ex-army stuff that police forces are buying up because the American military has to pour so much money into making weapons, then selling weapons only slightly out of date, so they all go to police, which make the police tougher and more like an army, which is the problem. And there's that whole side to it. There's also an element of how, the town, because of its incorporation status, which is, I know sounds really, dull, but there's a whole thing about how the town needs to basically politically survive as a unit, and that can only be done by this gang of corrupt cops leasing out their weapons and tooling up, and he's kind of stumbled into the middle of this, which again, it doesn't sound like the subject for electric drama, but it is hinting at a real thing in America that this it's the big P politics. There's the small P politics of this film's about racism and violence. The big P politics is actually about how the small town American political system works and how it kind of gets twisted out of shape into this kind of authoritarian form, which is kind of interesting. Again, all of this in the confines of a film that's about martial arts and messing with the wrong badass. So I thought that was an interesting element.
Yeah, no, it does do a good job of getting its message across. There's a few scenes where he talks to the lawyer who he befriends about the message, but it never becomes what I guess you call a very special episode or lecture. It's just part of his motivation. It does just feel like one of these things that just happens, this thing he's just stumbled into. It does just make it feel like he's just been, I don't know, unlucky to an extent, he's been unlucky to bump into these arseholes.
Yeah. Well, the thing it's the setting, it's the background of the film. But what makes it really work is two things: is that the background, the setting, reaches into actual politics and actual things to do with, again, incorporations, state funding. How stingy the American state is and how these sort of corrupt cartels kind of emerge. So the setting is reaching back into real world politics, but also it's funneling forward into creating character and drama. It shapes these characters. You then create drama. So it's not, again, there's no lectures, there's no points when they have to explain this is how this is going on and this stuff. It's the setting is there in the background and it's contributing to the drama, which is, again, a dude going to town on some racist cops. But I guess the feel is that the more you look into the film, there's more going on. It's also got this sort of element that's related to my essay about Hannah Arendt and Star Wars, which you can read on our website, which is that how under authoritarian systems you get government which is bureaucracy without representation, in that the sort of bureaucracy has taken over, become alive to a sort of weird degree, in a way inanimate things become alive and have their own sort of will. And again, it's just against a normal person. He's just a guy, he loses his money to help his brother out. He can't get it back from the system because even though the system has things it's not like a medieval fiefdom, someone takes your money and then you're nothing you can do about it. There are bureaucratic and political systems that he tries to explore, but they're always stand in his way. They're always against him. They refuse to give him what he is entitled to. We give him back his own property, which has been expropriated from him. And because it's not a normal functioning political system, it's an authority authoritarian system that has twisted, again, yeah, as I was saying before, like twisted the functioning of the state into something that's become corrupt and authoritarian. And that film is characterized very effectively in the film by simple things like the guy goes to a courthouse, has a slightly frustrating interaction with a clerk there. It explains the politics, builds up the setting, raises the tension. Boom, efficient. Politics, philosophy, tension, badasses in one short scene. Well done.
Yeah, and again, it's very lean, it's very tight. Towards the end, it arguably does blow up the scale a little bit. You finally do get to the point where it's just, one lone badass taking on about 10 people with guns. But they have built up to it so slowly and steadily, but it does still work.
Yeah, and it brings the spectacle for your conclusion. It does feel like it's building to a big conclusion.
Yeah, there's a point in the film about halfway through where it ceases to just be about him fighting to achieve, his brother's freedom and becomes about these larger things. But it never, it never blows up beyond all proportion. It never goes to the point we've criticised before with movies, where it becomes about abstract nouns. He at no point says he's fighting for the soul of the town, for example.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sort of thing to avoid, yeah. There's no speeches and things like that, yeah. It's still just a guy fighting for justice, which is, what all these friendly neighbourhood sociopath films are about, the sense of natural justice that's been disturbed. But this one, I think, what makes it, the best, hands down to say that from these category, is that it does have this sort of political message behind it, but it's not getting in the way. It's very much behind it.
Yeah, no, good film. Really, really glad I watched this. It had got a bit under the radar, so you suggested we cover it, but yeah, I enjoyed Green Room, so I was happy to watch this. It's good. If you haven't seen it on Netflix, because I think it has gone a tiny bit, as I say, low-key, then yeah, check it out.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's, good cast. Aaron Pierce, who was in Foe and Old, very good in this, in the main character. Anna Sophia Robb, also very good. And Don Johnson as the villain, who I think played a lot of cops in his career. He was in Miami Vice, the classic show, but he does good villain in this. So yeah, what's not to like?
Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, you can find more from us on our website at moderatefantasyviolence.com, including Alistair's much-trailed essay about Hannah Arendt and Star Wars. And if you've enjoyed the whole experience, then why not give us a nice 5-star review? Thank you very much.
You can also get more for us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook. Search for Moderate Fantasy Violence, or on Twitter and Blue Sky, we are at MFV Podcast. You can also get more from me by searching for Alistair Ball on Twitter, Blue Sky, or Instagram. You can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, or find my theatre reviews at Everything Theatre.
And you can find more from me at nickbryan.com. New Kickstarter coming any minute now, I'm sure. And you can also follow me on Twitter as NickMB, Blue Sky at Nick Bryan, and various other platforms also under the name Nick Bryan. And you can also join us back here next fortnight, when we will be talking about the 4th season of our beloved Angry Grumpy Spy show Slow Horses, and the new time travel comedy film Time Stalker. See you then for that. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right.
Right.
Cool. We're definitely leading to the sound effects.
Yeah.
Last time I had my